And the purpose of it is because Joseph then was not the father of Jesus, so he could not convey the curse that was given to Jeconiah in Jeremiah 22, verse 30. Then why give me a genealogy? And how is Jesus then from the house of David altogether?
Oh, you're live on the air. Please tell us your name. Where are you calling from?
This is Gabriel Mondragon, now in North Carolina. My question for Rabbi Tovia Singer, I bought his Let's Get Biblical series, and I listened to the whole thing. It's really good. Question is, why is lineage patriarchal or patrilineal for Jesus, but then matrilineal in Nehemiah? Like when the Jews married non-Jewish women in the book of Nehemiah, it was matrilineal lineage, but then for Jesus to not be the stump of David or the stump of Jesse, it was patrilineal. So my question is, why is it patrilineal in one and then matrilineal in the other? Thank you, and have a good day.
So I just want to give a background to this and why this question is so significant. The very first passage of the entire Christian Bible, Matthew, is the first book you read, and it begins with, this is the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. This is a monumental claim, because in order to be the Messiah, who is the Messiah after all? The Messiah is the heir to the Davidic throne. It's the culmination of a promise that God made to King David going all the way back to 2 Samuel. That's right, 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12 through 16. That from your sons will come forth all the kings. If one of the kings sins, I will punish him personally, but never take away the kingship from your descendants. And through King Solomon will come all the kings, the one who will build this house in my name. The problem does not appear in Paul's letters, which are the earliest in the Christian Bible, chronologically when they were written, not when they appear in the New Testament. And the problem has not yet creeped into Christianity when the book of Mark was written, the earliest of the Gospels chronologically written about the year 70. But the problem becomes astounding in about the year 80 and 85, when the book of Matthew and Luke were both written. What makes those two books unique and stand out is that it is only in these two books that it is claimed that Jesus was born to Mary, who was a virgin. Now, it isn't hard to understand how the idea of a virgin birth would creep into the Christian religion later on at the end of the first century. After all, the idea that the gods and demigods in the Greco-Roman world were born to women who were impregnated by God, that was well known, whether it was Romulus, whether it was Alexander the Great, whether it was Pythagoras. It didn't make a difference. Hercules, the whole deal. So it's understandable how this idea would be adopted by the Christendom. However, when the church adopted the idea that Jesus was conceived to a virgin, it then sabotaged the possibility that he can possibly be the Messiah. Why? Because the way that tribe identity is conveyed, the Torah tells us, is through the Father. See Numbers chapter 1, verse 18. It's all over the place. We are told very explicitly, the tribe identity is lemishpachosam leves avosam, according to the families, according to the father's house. So only a human Jewish father could convey tribe identity to his son. And that's how like I'm a Kohen from the house of Levi, a direct descendant of Aaron, specifically because my father's father's father is a descendant of Aharon, the brother of Moses of blessed memory. All right? So the problem when you claim a virgin birth is that now you have no human Jewish father with which to trace Jesus' genealogy. It just sabotages the whole religion. once you import something that's completely alien, the virgin birth in this case, an idea that had not been known to Paul, wasn't known to the author of the book of Mark. The author of the book of Mark did not think there was anything unique about Jesus' conception to Mary, or he didn't think it was important enough to mention. The book of Hebrews didn't think it was important enough to mention. The point is, none of them believed it. It's a later idea, but by inserting the idea that Jesus was conceived to a virgin, it then destroys, it sabotages, it collapses the whole notion that Jesus could possibly be the Messiah, because Jesus then is not the son of Joseph. That means, sure, Matthew could outline a whole elaborate 41 generation line between Jesus to Abraham in the case of Matthew. Luke's genealogy goes back to Adam itself. But those putative genealogies of Joseph have nothing then to do with Jesus. That means if Joseph did not sire Jesus, if he was not his biological father, then all we have in Luke 3 and in Matthew 1 is a genealogy of Joseph, who is not the father of Jesus. See, this is like monumental. It just shatters the claim that Jesus is the Messiah. And if Matthew is not to be believed and Luke's not to be believed, because those are the only two books in the Christian Bible that make the claim that Jesus was born to a virgin, then the credibility of the whole New Testament collapses. Matthew, of course, goes a step further and says there's actually a verse in Isaiah which supports the notion that the Messiah is to be born of a virgin. That claim is completely manufactured. Isaiah 7:14 is, the words are changed, ripped out of context. It's a scandal. But I want to stay on track here. So the way you know your Jewish identity is through the mother. So don't be confused about this. Your brother is only the son of your mother, not the son of your father as a Jew. You can see Deuteronomy 13. It's only the mother who conveys Jewish identity, and it's only the father who can convey tribe identity. Incidentally, if you have a Jewish father who's from a certain tribe, but you don't have a Jewish mother, then you're not even Jewish, so it doesn't even work. Now, moreover, and here's what's critical, we have many examples in Tanakh, thank goodness, not too many, but enough, where you have intermarriages in the Hebrew Bible. That means you have a child who's a descendant of a Jewish woman, but a non-Jewish father. So in those cases, the child is deemed to be Jewish, right? You have in Leviticus the story of the tragic story of the son of a Jewish mother who happens to be from the tribe of Dan, and a father who's an Egyptian. So you have a completely illicit relationship, but the child is still considered Jewish. Conversely, in Ezra chapter 10, as an example, you have Jewish men who returned back to the land of Israel to build the second temple. So this is 2,500 years ago. These are what's called the Shevivei Tzion, those who return to Zion, and we are given in chapter 10, beginning in verse 13, 113 men who marry non-Jewish women, and they're told that they have to send away their non-Jewish wives and their children. Their children are sent away because they're not regarded as Jewish any longer. Now that we have that, the question is, how do missionaries deal with that? And you raise an intriguing point. You go, well, what's going on? Don't we have a case in the book of Nehemiah, really at the end of the book of Nehemiah, chapter 13, verses 23 all the way through 28, 29. What comes into view there is essentially the same problem as you have in Ezra chapter 10. That means Jewish men marrying non-Jewish women, and very specifically, I'm sure you're referring to verses 28, you have a son of a man named Yoda, who's a Kohen Gadol, who's a high priest, and his son went and took a non-Jewish woman, married out of the faith. So from 23 on, you have all these Jewish men who, context historically, the Jews, 42,360 Jews, returned to the land of Israel from Bavel, from Babylon. Okay, so they're here in Israel. And then there's few subsequent waves of Jews. And here in the Holy Land, you had a non-Jewish population. And many of these Jewish men tragically took non-Jewish women. And here we have it again. What happens to these men who behave this way? In verse 28, it says specifically that he was expelled from the community. So nowhere in Nehemiah does it say that his descendants, Yoyada's grandchildren, were regarded as Kohanim, as priests, anywhere. So this is, forgive me, but this is nonsense. The way the book of Nehemiah ends, as it continues, because this is the last chapter of Nehemiah, is that there was a purging in the priesthood to make sure that the priesthood was pure and intact. A person who is a Kohen comes from a very unique line, a promised line, a line in which there is a covenant that God made with Aharon, a blessed memory, the brother of Moses. So there is a purging, a cleansing of the Kohanim and the Leviim, the priests and the Levites. So there's nowhere in Nehemiah chapter 13 that it tells us that these children were considered priests anywhere. So when people say that, I don't know where they pull these things out of nowhere. I say this to you. Always look it up for yourself. What happens is missionaries come up with the most torturous explanations to address, to sidestep, to dodge these existential problems. Just torturous. And when you hear a missionary advance these ideas, I strongly encourage you to go, let me look it up for myself. There's another passage that missionaries bring up even more frequently than the one you raised, and that's in 1 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 34. And there you have another case of an illicit relationship. There, what comes into view is a man named Sheshan. He only had daughters. And what did he do? He freed his slave, whose name was Yarcha, and he married his daughter to an Egyptian slave. So this is very important. This Jewish man, has a daughter, has no sons, right? So what he does is he frees his Egyptian servant, and he marries them. And then we have a whole line of people listed in Chronicles who are descendants of this illicit relationship. Why is it illicit? What's wrong with it? Well, what's wrong with it is Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 8 and 9. What's wrong with it is that an Egyptian cannot just convert to Judaism and then marry into the Jewish faith. That's not possible. The Torah forbids that. It's an illicit relationship. Deuteronomy 23, verse 8 and 9. Until the third generation, an Egyptian cannot marry in to the nation of Israel. One little point here, it's like, a heads up. It doesn't mean the Egyptians today, I mean people living in Egypt today. If someone in Egypt today wants to convert to Judaism, they are not regarded as Egyptians because the Egyptian population is completely homogenized, and the people who live in Egypt today are not very likely, almost certainly, not from the ancient Egyptians of biblical times. So it's not referring to someone, if you're listening to my voice right now and you're in Giza, you're in Cairo, this has no application to you. But then it really did, okay? So an Egyptian is not allowed to marry in to the Jewish people. Wants to convert, but you have to marry another Egyptian convert. You cannot marry in. So, and what we see in 1 Chronicles chapter 2, if we continue, is that we have a whole line of some 15 generations that follow, but nowhere in this list, nowhere does it say that those descendants were considered part of the tribe of Judah. Nowhere is it said that they're from the house of David. Please look it up for yourself. It's quite the contrary. because we have an illicit relationship, meaning a Jewish girl marries an Egyptian who's freed and therefore converted to Judaism, that relationship is forbidden. And therefore, their descendants are, I don't want to use the word, are tarnished. They cannot join the nation of Israel for what we see there 15 generations. So this is like a red light. There are so many torturous responses to this. And you can imagine, if you want to be a Christian, it has to make sense in view of Tanakh, of the Hebrew scriptures. And Christians are frankly in a lot of trouble on this one. I mean, this came up in the debate. It's a very big problem. It's not a problem. It shows what happened to Christianity. There are some Christians that argue, and this happened in a debate that I had years ago, where the person I was debating said that, well, there's a curse in Jeremiah chapter 22, verse 30, where Jeconiah is cursed, that none of his descendants will sit on the throne of David. Okay? There's a curse. Jeconiah was like a Jewish Caligula. He was out of his mind. It was horrible. So much so that Jeremiah cursed him that none of your descendants will ever sit on the throne of David. You'll be childless in that none of your descendants will sit on the throne of David. And as it turns out, Jeconiah's the person who replaces Jeconiah, the next king, Davidic king, is not a descendant of his, but rather his uncle. Okay, it goes to the uncle. Matthew messes this up, but as it turns out, if you go to Matthew chapter 1, verse 11, there's Jeconiah. Okay, so if Jesus is a descendant of Jeconiah, as we're told in Matthew chapter 1, verse 11, then Jesus can't be the Messiah because he's from a cursed lineage. And believe it or not, I mean, just hope you're holding on to your seats here, is one of the ways that Christians try to dodge this problem. They say, that's why you need the virgin birth. Because Jesus then wasn't really a descendant of Jeconiah because Jesus wasn't a descendant of Joseph. So the virgin birth solves everything. I don't know if you even absorbed what I just said. I don't know if I'm speaking too quickly. I don't know if this should just blow you out the window, right? I mean, the church seeks, and all these missionaries, they come up with these convoluted, these torturous responses, and they're in a lot of trouble. I don't envy them. And that is that, you need a virgin birth, because Jesus was born of a virgin, then he's not a descendant of Joseph, which means he's not a descendant of Jeconiah, and then he's not under the curse. So then why give me the genealogy for? Then this is not the genealogy of Jesus. You understand the problem? I don't know if you understand this. It means if the virgin birth is there, and the purpose of it is because Joseph then was not the father of Jesus, so he could not convey the curse that was given to Jeconiah in Jeremiah 22, verse 30, then why give me a genealogy? And how is Jesus then from the house of David altogether? And Luke's genealogy is worthless anyways because it traces the genealogy from Nathan. It's a completely different genealogy. It is very different. Most importantly, David had a number of sons, Nathan one, Solomon another, but the Davidic line for kingship really only comes through Solomon because it's the one who will build a house in my name. So Luke's genealogy is worthless anyways, but Matthew's genealogy is just riddled with problems. And what I'm sharing with you now is just the tip of the iceberg. I go into this extensively. So just to sum this all up, in Nehemiah, last chapter 13, there's nowhere that it says that the grandchildren of a priest who had married a non-Jew is then considered a priest. It's not family. He was expelled for this. He's not even Jewish. It's all ridiculous. There's nowhere in 1 Chronicles 2 that says that the descendants of a Jewish girl who marries an Egyptian, that their descendants are from the house of David. It lists them as a warning. Look, these are all the people. This is an illicit family line. So none of this works at all. We got to get back to Tanakh, get back to the Jewish scriptures, and Christians need to thoughtfully address these questions. And I just want to say this, that don't be angry at these Christians. This is what they're fed through websites and missionary books and pamphlets and tracts, trying to dodge these existential problems. And all these responses to this only make the problem even worse, only amp up the problem. I mean, if Jesus is born to a virgin, dodges a curse with Jeconiah, then why do I need the genealogy for? And then Jesus is not from the house of David. Let us hope that people will study this, return back to the God of Israel, and we will see the coming of a true Messiah who truly is from the house of David and Solomon quickly in our time. Thank you for that question.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא ואת נעשה